morning, everybody. I hope you all had a wonderful evening last night. Thank you, Dan, for kicking us off yesterday with another very insightful and thought-provoking presentation. I always appreciate the comments you bring to this and the thoughts you bring to this summit. A lot of what you're going to hear today, even though Dan and I didn't really coordinate, you're going to hear a lot of similar themes based on what we've been hearing in the industry as well. And I think what we want to talk about today is how do you actually go about facilitating successful digital transformation in CMC, right? We all, again, know what we want to do. We all know why we want to do it. It's a big question around how do you go about doing it. And there's a lot of lessons that we've learned over the years as we've been working with a variety of different companies, a lot of customers or prospects who've said, well, we're not ready for that yet. And so you kind of probe why are you not ready for it and what's holding you back. And so we've been at this for 6 years, right? We started in 2017 and been through a variety of various volatile environments, just like you all have been through. And so the learnings continue. And we wanted to share some of this today with you, talk about what we see out there, and how we think we can move the industry forward. So some of the themes that we encountered throughout the year, and have been throughout the years, I would say, companies continue to struggle with data and digital technologies. This is just there's a lot happening. Things are moving quickly, and trying to keep up with it while you're trying to do your day job, if you will, which is making innovative therapies, is a challenge, there's no doubt. There's issues around literacy, right? Poor understanding of the data, information, knowledge, intelligence progression, right? Everybody's very focused on data. What do I do with my data? And as Dan pointed out yesterday, data in and of itself is meaningless, right? So you have to put these layers of context around it, right? If I tell you, hey, I just measured a pH of 7.4, you have no idea what that means, right? If I say, oh, it's 7.4 and the spec was 7.0 to 7.2, now you have some context, right? Now we have a situation where we're out of specification. Okay, now what? Right now we still don't know what you want to do about it, right? Because the next question is, well, how important is that pH, right? So that progression of data to information to knowledge to intelligence is critical, and that's something that the industry has to work towards if it's going to meet the objectives that Dan was laying out. Too busy doing the work to worry about the data, right? I got to get my batches done. I got to get my samples measured, right? Great. What are you going to do with the data? Oh, I'll worry about that later. I'll just stuff it into a spreadsheet. I have the raw data saved somewhere. I'll deal with it later, right? Well, guess what? Later never comes, right? You're on to the next thing, and you're on to the next thing. Trying to figure out what to do with the data, right? They're just too busy. We don't have time to worry about it right now. We got to get that clinical trial data, right? We got to get the clinical manufacturing done. But this just is a problem that compounds, and it compounds, right? And so we hear this a lot. Too focused on primary data and not primary outcomes, right? So as Dan mentioned, right? We're all here about the patient, right? That's what patient outcomes are what we're worried about. We should be worried about, but we get too focused on the data. And also just the primary data, the 6.3, the 5.9, the 2.1, right? But again, none of that means much unless you have the information and knowledge and intelligence around it. It feels like we're moving from paper silos to digital silos, right? Everybody's like, oh, well, we're not ready for this yet. We're getting our ELN in place. Or we're getting our LIMS in place, right? So what we're seeing is a lot of people working towards, they think of digitization and digitalization as, well, just implementing software solutions to do specific tasks that were done on paper before or was done on Excel spreadsheets before, right? But this is what the industry's been doing for 30, 40 years. We've been going from paper to electronic and not really to digital, right? And so, what it seems like what's happening out there is that we're just creating digital silos. So the catapult is now not paper being thrown over the wall, but it's just bits being thrown over the wall to another bucket, right? And I think this is the biggest challenge, is that people aren't thinking holistically about the flow of data across the CMC organization, right? And this really speaks to data governance and data integrity. So again, if I've measured that value of pH, how does that value now flow through your entire sort of data progression, if you will, right? Where does it get recorded? What's the audit trail? How does that get linked to other pieces of information that start to put that context around this? And so, people start, then that's the point solution issue as well, right? People are saying, well, I just need to, get my ELN in place, right? Yes, but as you talk to people who have been watching what's happening, they feel like ELN is starting to, the unstructured nature of ELN is starting to create its own sort of spaghetti mess of data that you now have to deal with just in a different form. So, because of the pandemic and a lot of other, and the advancement of a lot of technologies, there's a lot of discussion going on about how to rethink your operations in various aspects of the pharma industry. The McKinsey Group put this article out in 2022. I thought it was interesting calling it Out of the Shadows, because sort of CMC has sat in the shadows, right, for a long time. And so they've certainly recognized that pharma technical development has to come out of the shadows, and this article was very interesting in terms of some of the recommendations that it was making, because they fit with what Dan was talking about and certainly what we are encouraging as well with the things that we're trying to do and some of the other innovative solutions in the industry are trying to do. So they listed 5 imperatives for CMC transformation. Making technical development more patient-centric. This is what Dan was talking about yesterday. We have to, not sit in our chevrons and think about what, I have to do for my chevron. We have to think about, how does my chevron fit into the larger context of patient centricity? Adopting data-driven technical development. This is sort of a no-brainer, right? We need to do that. Again, this is a lot of what's, but this feeds into the how discussion that we're going to have later in the presentation. Unlocking the full scientific potential of CMC, right? So not thinking of CMC as just essentially a compliance function, right? Oh, we make our 3 batches, we prove that we can do it, and we move on, right? The regulatory agencies are not looking at it that way anymore, right? And a perfect example is the recent change to the PAI guidance, the pre-approval inspection guidance, right? They added a 4th objective. Does anybody know what that 4th objective is? It's a commitment to quality in pharmaceutical development. Now, that was a very it was sort of under the radar change, but it's very impactful to the CMC organizations in the industry, because what that means is the inspectors are going to come in and they're going to look at what was your knowledge and risk-based approach during development. They're trying to understand, do you understand your process, or did you just drive to being able to show that you could do 3 batches, meet your specs, and be ready to move on, right? Because they may let you keep going, but I think the implication is that if your next batch fails, right, how are you gonna have the conversation as to whether it's an outlier, right, or not? And you can't have that conversation if you can't show that you have robust process understanding, which you won't have if you haven't done knowledge and risk-based, taken a knowledge and risk-based approach in development. Cross-functional collaboration across your organization. So this is breaking out of those chevrons and starting to, mix and match a little bit, and then embedding sustainability into pharma development too. But the key piece is that they don't believe you can do this if you don't have a fit-for-purpose digital infrastructure with a tailored data backbone. So key point. So let's dive into just the data-driven technical development for a second. Process automation, centralized real-time data and process visibility, in silico modeling and analytical methods, advanced analytics. Close collaboration with manufacturing, regulatory, and clinical development. This is a key piece, right? If you're not talking to each other and you're just staying in your chevrons, this becomes a problem because you can't accelerate. An agile team working iteratively to shorten the critical path of CMC activities. So this is a theme that we're going to certainly be talking about in the rest of this presentation and going forward, is that in order for pharma to get better, faster, and accelerate time to market, they have to start adopting agile methodologies. And you can do that. It's not to say that that somehow blows you out of compliance, right? It actually doesn't. They're not, the regulators aren't saying, well, do waterfall or do this or that. They're just telling you what they're expecting from an outcome perspective. You decide how you want to do it. So it's perfectly reasonable to adopt an agile approach, right? Of course, there's a lot of cultural shifts that have to happen, but this is the direction that the industry has to go to. And so, automation of data capture, analysis, and generation of technical and regulatory reports. What they're really saying is here, leverage the tools that are out there to do to take care of the mundane stuff, right? Spend more time on the science, spend more time talking to each other, right? Spend more time being agile, spend less time generating documents, trying to figure out which version is correct, so on and so forth. So understanding the tools that are available. So I don't know if anybody here is a fan of the movie Princess Bride. I'm a big fan of that movie, right? And there's a character, Vicini, who keeps saying the word inconceivable. And at some point, Inigo Montoya says, I don't think that word means what you think it means. And I think AI is a perfect example of that. Really, most things that we think are AI are actually machine learning, right? They're actually not AI. And machine learning is just the next iteration of things that we've been doing for a long time, right? We have always been generating more data than we know what to do with, right? Maybe it was, megabytes before, then it went to gigabytes, and then there are terabytes, now we're into petabytes. So we're always generating more than we know what to do with. And so the first thing we always have to do is we have to reduce the dimensionality of the data to figure out what to do with it, right? Like all the data you generate isn't necessarily valuable. There's dimensions of it that you can filter down and say, well, these 5 dimensions are actually what's critical to figuring out what's going on. And we used to do that, with things like linear discriminant analysis, principal component analysis. These are the mathematical algorithms that we use to reduce dimensionality. And a lot of machine learning is just the deployment of neural networks to do those exact same things. You're still doing classification, tasks and these other tasks that we're clustering and these things that we've always done before. So really, what we're still doing is taking all this information and trying to figure out how to reduce the dimensionality of it. That's the nail we're trying to hit right now, right, with some of these tools. And you don't necessarily need AI, you don't necessarily need generative AI, but they all do that in different ways. They reduce the dimensionality. That's what we love about it. It helps us focus to figure out what to do. Now, where AI and generative AI really start to help is identifying new relationships, right? The things that we are unknown, right? So now you're in the nonlinear world. In the linear world, you can use standard algorithms to reduce dimensionality, but in the nonlinear world, right, where there's all kinds of variables, their relationships are not necessarily linear. You need different ways to figure out what the relationships are and what the things are that are hidden that we can't see, the unknown unknowns, if you will, right? And so that's where AI is applicable, right? That's where it is going to help. So if you think about drug discovery, right, trying to think about how potent AI has been to help figure out new potential, leads and so on and so forth. Now, generative AI has a ton of promise, right? But really, we're spending a lot of time today just using it to help us do better with extracting information out of vast amounts of unstructured data. That's really what we're doing today, right? We haven't really leveraged it beyond that yet. That's the focus of this right now. Better searching contextually. I mean, you search something on Google today and it's awful, right? You don't get anything of value very much. You need better searching tools for the amount of information that's out there. So we see generative AI, you're seeing it being used for contextual searching, aggregation of unstructured data. That's the primary way people are trying to monetize it and use it today. But we believe that structuring data also reduces dimensionality. What you're doing when you're structuring data is you're reducing dimensionality a priori, right? Those are all tools to reduce dimensionality after you've collected vast amounts of data. But what if you could say, hey, let's have a fit-for-purpose platform where we define the things that we know we need to take care of, we need to capture. Why do we know that? Well, because there are guidelines that tell us that. And then once you have a structured framework, you can easily build translators to map into whatever other structured framework you want to use, right? So the approach that we've taken is to take all this unstructured data in Word and Excel and PDF, put it into a structured format, and then allow you to translate that into other platforms as you need to. So what should that structure be, right? Oh yeah, okay, it's easy to say let's structure the data, but what should the structure be? Well, we believe there is a hierarchy of taxonomy and ontologies that we're all utilizing in the industry, right? It starts with principles like quality by design, by good practices, with ISO 14971 as your sort of baseline definition of risk management. The data integrity guidelines, right? These are all out there as your baseline for taxonomy and ontology. Well, ICH-Q8 is a harmonization effort that essentially pulls all these principles together in many ways, right? So ICH-Q1 to Q14, right? Q8 has good quality by design, Q9 has risk assessment, which references ISO 14971, right? I think Q7 has got GMP, so on and so forth. So it was a harmonization attempt to take all these base principles and put it together for us to think about holistically. Then you start to think about, well, what's phase appropriate, right? So you have GLP in the early days, you start moving to GMP, CGMP, right? Then you have sort of the taxonomies of the different chevrons, if you will, right? What are process development characterization people saying and thinking? What are process capability, validation, and manufacturing? And then, of course, the little regulatory pieces pop up over time. You got to get an IND put together. You got to get a BLA put together, and now the PAI piece as well. So there is a hierarchy that we believe you can leverage that is effectively applicable to all of us in the industry, right? Across this entire life cycle of development and building your control strategy framework, and ultimately to meet the requirements of validation. So we work through, starting with the technologies. So these are the hammers at the bottom, right? We're building, right? So the hammers at the bottom, putting together the foundations and the structured data framework to atomize data, to organize it, to contextualize it, and so forth. Building that contextualization layer on top of that. Generating key pillars of value. So now we're saying, well, as an industry, we have to focus on digital product and process management, digital resource management, digital control strategy, and digital tech transfer, and then the value propositions that come out of that for management of materials, for a holistic control strategy, for all the work that has to happen for regulatory CMC and PAI. This is bringing together the different chevrons, right, as an entire holistic approach. So digital infrastructure, we believe, equals the digital CMC ecosystem. We are just one element of that. A lot of the solutions that are out there are one element of that. But ultimately, you have a situation where at the bottom sits all your primary data. And it's all the solutions that control and manage your primary data, right? The blue box has traditionally been Microsoft Office, right? Reports and documents and spreadsheets that try to provide some kind of context, that information below, right? Trying to interact with business systems, which doesn't really work very well. It doesn't enable the capabilities that you really want. Centralizing your product knowledge, process knowledge and analysis, all these things that you really want as institutional knowledge for your organization are impossible to put together when that blue box is Microsoft Office. So, we have come in as a knowledge management solution to work with business systems, to work with primary data systems, right, to enable these capabilities as part of the entire ecosystem. It's why we started this summit as well, too, because we know if we just think about what we do in isolation, then we're just creating another digital silo that doesn't help anybody in the long run. So what about organizational culture, right? We've all seen this. Many of us are the people holding the wheel, talking to these other guys, like, you're just baffled, right? You're absolutely baffled why you would continue to pull the rocks with square wheels. But this happens all the time, right? And so how do we go about taking these other concepts of modernization and handling it with this mindset that's in many organizations? Well, the Bioforum Group put out a URS back in 2020 for knowledge management in a biopharmaceutical setting. And this diagram was in there where they're saying, well, you have to have a foundation of information technology, which then gives you the content, then helps you modify your business process to help your people. Except technology is not a driver. It's an enabler, right? And so what you end up with is this taking you down the standard disruption J-curve, right? And this is interesting because the red is what the people receiving the solution thinks going to happen, right? They think this is what's going to happen. I'm going to get this thing, and my productivity is just going to take off. Except what happens instead is the solid blue line, because the dotted blue line, which is actually the leadership of the organization thinking about change management as part of the deployment of the solution, doesn't happen very often, right? And so what we end up with here is you're at the bottom of that J-curve, and people get tired, and they get frustrated, and they give up, and they go, this is not doing what I wanted it to do. Why are we wasting our time with this? Because they're not going to wait for the second half of that curve to come up, right? Because this is always going to happen. As you bring new solutions in, you're always going to lose some productivity in the beginning until you make that investment, right, to get that efficiency from whatever solution it is you're deploying. So what we found is that really agility is the better mentality for lasting change, right? It has to start with people, not with the technology, right? Technology is not a driver, it's an enabler, right? And so people come together and they say, hey, I've got an imperative of some sort. It's driven by business need or regulatory need, right? Say, okay, hey, you know what? We're spending way too much time. It costs us way too much money to do tech transfer. It's taken us on average 24 months. We got to figure out a way to shorten that, okay? Maybe your outcome is going to be, let's try to get it down from 24 months to 18 months, right? Okay, now you have something you have targeted. Now you go say, what are the technology solutions that are available out there to help us get from 24 months to 18 months, right? Now, technology is the enabler of the outcome that you want. You deploy that technology, if it works, you adjust your business process, and you start over again, right? Maybe you're still back at tech, right? We got 24 months to 18 months. Let's go from 18 months to 12 months next, right? Instead of trying to eat the whole apple at once and boil the ocean, whatever metaphor you want to use, right? Where you want to take something from 24 months to 3 months? No. That's not going to make any sense. It's not going to happen, and you're going to get frustrated along the way. And so what that does is it creates a different J-curve. Still looks kind of like a J, but it's more of an evolutionary J, right? You evaluate, you make a change. If it improves, you evaluate again, you make your change, right? Evaluate again. Oh, maybe it didn't work. Roll back, right? You're not rolling all the way back to the bottom of the hill, right? And so what we have found is that the organizations that are being successful with their transformation efforts are the ones that are actually doing this, not that. So, recommended best practices, focus on business outcomes of operational efficiency, not on the technology, not on primary data, right? Stop doing that. Understanding your data flow. How are you going to go from data to information to knowledge to ultimately intelligence, right? Understanding that your data capability is going to impact your process capability. So if all you do is do work and stuff your data in a spreadsheet, you're not data capable, right? And therefore, you're not going to understand your process capability because you're not utilizing your data, right, to be data-driven, to understand what's happening, to drive your decisions going forward. Better collaboration between process development and manufacturing. So manufacturing says, hey, we want to try, you know, we have a directive from leadership. We have to reduce our tech transfer times. We want to try new solutions. Love to try what you're doing. Oh, by the way, process development is not interested in working with us, right? So either that blocks, or manufacturer says, you know what, the hell with it, we'll just get the information however we can get it from process development, and we'll move from there. That's not really solving the problem, right? Thinking of technology as an enabler and not a driver. And really facilitating education and training to improve data and digital literacy across the organization. I think this is a key piece, right? Things are moving so fast, right? And understanding what data and digital actually means and how best to deploy it, it's not just IT, right? It's really understanding technology and how technology can deliver what you need. And I think there needs to be some focus on that within organizations to drive that level of education and workforce training. So, you know, embrace the opportunity. It's there. There's ways to do this. There's companies that are being successful with their transformation efforts. But it's a very agile approach that they're taking. And so, you know, we're encouraged by the thought leaders that are out there. They're moving, and they're moving quickly, like Dan said, and they are thriving, right, as a result of it. So, thank you. I think we'll have time for questions and stuff in the panel session. Yeah. Oh yeah. So I'm gonna introduce Gloria. Can you get her? All right. So our next speaker is Gloria Gadea Lopez. We've known Gloria for a long time. I think I showed her our platform. Can you make it bigger? I can't see. Been working with her for a long time. Had a chance to show her what we were doing in the very beginning back in 2018, I think, and was absolutely, you know, fell in love with the approach. Gloria is currently the head of Global Consultancy at Business Platforms. She's been using her prior and extensive experience in the biopharmaceutical industry. She supports companies in developing strategies and delivering digital systems for successful operations. You know, she was previously at Shire, previously at Accenture, so really looking forward to hearing your talk, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much. It's really my pleasure being here and sharing these thoughts with you. I want to start by thanking you all for making the effort, travel here to attend this conference. I think it's really important that we get together as the community of practitioners, people interested in advancing digital technology in the industry, and that we share our ideas and our ideals, no? As people from the industry, consultants, vendors. And also a big thank you to Yash and the team at QbDVision for organizing this event. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So what you'll see here are some thoughts I've compiled about the role that strategy plays in the implementation of digital innovation. Some ideas that we have obtained from our direct practice, first in the industry and later as a consultant, and I hope that you find this useful. So that's me, as I said. We work at business platforms as the head of the Global Consultancy, and previously I worked at Genzyme, where I started my career and stayed for over 15 years, and later at Shire, where I was with my team working on the implementation of systems, operation systems. And in the last 5 years or so, I work in consulting, first at ESP, Accenture, and more recently then at business platforms. So we support clients in the implementation of digital technologies across the life cycle. And we specialize in life sciences. And as I said, we cover the spectrum, all the digital technology innovation across the life cycle and globally. So today, speaking about what we see as trends in the life science industry, we'll talk about examples of these hot topics and how they apply at the different stages of the product and the process life cycle. We'll look in more detail at digital strategy, the alignment of digital and business strategies to achieve those desired outcomes. And I'm sorry. Sure, I'm sorry. Oh. Can you hear me now? Is that good? Thank you. Apologies. So we look at some of the challenges that we face when we are onboarding technology. So we have to acknowledge the complexity. What happens when we think about bringing technology? So it's in itself not the end. And there are usually implications about the alignment that needs to happen with other existing or future systems. Also, what happens to our business processes. After all, these technologies are going to help us with the execution of the transactions in the process and the acquisition of data. So we need to have a global understanding, a holistic understanding of what that change or that innovation is going to bring. And then I'll summarize some ideas, planning for success, and some takeaways at the end, okay? So when we think about the life science industry and the areas of innovation, we can broadly divide it in these categories. We're seeing interest in advanced data and analytics. The most important point probably here is that we all want to see all the data, all the time, immediately, about every single aspect of the process or the product. So that end-to-end visibility is probably the most requested, I will say, type of project inquiry that we receive from our clients, no? For example, we want to see the batch progression of the batch progression along the value stream. We want to know exactly where the batch is. If we bring API from a CMO, when it's received, is it on time? Where is the batch record right now? How is it moving? Are the samples tested? Are we getting all the results as expected? When is it the batch review and release? Is it ready for distribution? So the complete understanding of the value stream, as well as the understanding of the network capacity. Huge emphasis on this topic after the pandemic, for example, especially paying attention to the capacity of the CMOs, the availability of critical raw materials from our suppliers. Lots of emphasis on digital quality, looking at methodologies for automated or advanced load review and release. So we're going to get this expanded, as a topic expanded in a moment, the idea of developing digital twins and simulation, and that in itself is a very broad concept that requires a lot of attention because there are so many different description and interpretation of what the digital twin could be, no? So equipment analytics and so on. In process technology, we think about the implementation of manufacturing execution systems, for example, prior to commercial stages, which is in itself a new trend. We have seen MES in commercial applications, but now we're thinking about previous stages. The adoption of cloud-based systems, the compliance related to that. Lots of discussion internally at companies on how to manage cloud-based systems, not just on-premise in the management of versions of technologies. The expanded use of robotic and single-use systems, that is not necessarily a new thing. We started seeing that in 10 years ago or so, but it's definitely something that we're seeing that has a lot of emphasis. So it's interesting in itself because it's innovation, it's process innovation that makes us think about the impact that the new system is going to have across all the digital technologies. In ERP, the configuration of the bills of materials, the consumption of those raw materials and their operation in manufacturing execution systems, the data, because we need to characterize these materials, and the performance after use, for example. So it's an interesting topic because, and that we don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to it, because it's not digital technology, but impacts everything else around it. No? And then in the user experience, what we see is augmented reality as a tool to share experiences, to share the oversight remotely of operations. We see very interesting applications for training, a significant opportunity here in complementing the technologies available from MES, but it can be enhanced or actually replacing some of the cases that we're seeing. So see now too is this classification of usual examples about innovation across the process and the product life cycle. With smaller companies that are in the early stages of clinical development, there's a lot of emphasis in laboratory systems, the management of very large volumes of data that originate, for example, from the interpretation of pictures, from tissue pictures, and collecting all the data and interpretation of observations from that. Sometimes companies are not necessarily prepared with an infrastructure to manage something like this. In the mid-sized companies, we see transition from strict lab technologies to manufacturing execution, some investments there on MES, some interfacing of instruments with MES, more investment and acknowledgement of the role of knowledge management, the classification of data, starting to see and pay attention to that structure, data structures that are anticipated to expand the use when we become or commercialize. And then for the large companies, we see now more interest in a comprehensive digital technology, the expansion of MES with interfaces with ERP, with automation, with the laboratory systems, and also advanced analytics, now investment on machine learning, the obviously artificial intelligence and the availability of data, more interest in digital technology transfer that is shared also with the mid-size organizations. Now, let's think about that strategic alignment that we were talking about before. So all of this should happen, not necessarily for the sake of technology alone. No? It happens because we have a vision and we close our eyes and imagine how we want to operate. We will want to have the right digital landscape with all the appropriate systems that are going to support the transactions of the process and the capture of the data. We want to have the right processes and use them correctly with the support of those digital technologies. So that will be our mission digital. Yeah? And there are some strategies that we can apply. For example, we can say, I want to have the right technology to deliver the right fix, the fit for purpose applications, no? Driving for good configuration, reducing the cost of very expensive customizations, for example. We want to have standard data and standard processes. We want to have also the right people to manage these applications. And then as we move to the right, we start to see more granularity about what those goals are. We want to reduce, for example, the cycle time for load review and release. We want to optimize line optimization, utilization. We want to eliminate the risk of low inventories of critical raw materials, for example. And then on the right side is when we have the very specific objectives. No? What are those things that we want to assign to people, that we are going to budget for, that we're going to have a timeline? We want to know when those are going to be delivered. And those are the examples of implementation of a digital technology transfer process. We want to have single-use systems, data management. We have to have available a network analytics platform. So these are like the very, very specific outcomes that we want to see. But all of that originated from having that digital vision that must be aligned with the business strategy. And that's sometimes the disconnect, that there is a digital vision that is not necessarily aligned. And then what we see is on the business side, consumers of this technology are not ready or don't appreciate the value because it's not going to deliver a solution to the real life problems. So the alignment of that digital vision and the business vision is very critical. And you will see here is that many times these objectives are the solutions to problems that were detected through operational excellence exercises. And sometimes we don't think about. So operational excellence is doing their analysis, the value stream analysis, coming up with lists of issues that they perceive, but we miss that connection between that problem, the fix of that problem, and digital technology, the functionality of systems that can fix it. So that is what I wanted to show here then. So examples of these, the transformational initiative examples, no? If we pick the expedited load release, the data management of single-use systems, the operator training, digital tech transfer, and network capacity, very likely we already made efforts in those areas. So it's really important that we understand the baseline indicated here with that blue line and where we want to go. And where we want to go needs to be practical. Sometimes it becomes very aspirational and is impossible to achieve with our limited resources of time, people, and money. They're like, how we're going to achieve that extremely aspirational endpoint? So we need to come up with a goal that is realistic. And that's why we want to indicate that usually if 5 is exceptionally difficult or expensive, we want to stay maybe around 4, where we achieve all the functionalities that we need without actually sacrificing anything. And if we do that, for all our ideas, for all those objectives, we see how we are going to be addressing an opportunity area. We are going to define a use case. For example, if we look at the first row there, business, process, and technology approach to automate and expedite batch release. And what will be the innovation area? Well, that will be the manufacturing execution system enabled with the functionality of review by exception, LIMS enabling us the creation of that certificate of analysis, for example, the ability to scan across the quality management system, looking at the logs of equipment, et cetera. So all those pieces that need to come together to promote the automated load review and release. So we can prioritize our portfolios, assign the budgets, identify the talent, and plan well for the delivery of all these projects. I'm sorry, let me go back here for a second. So one way to think about, in the case of the load review and release, no, is think about of all the pieces that need to come together to achieve that goal, starting with a standardized process, production process, and with a well-defined business process for load review and release that we are going to enable with all these different functionalities we were saying before. We need to identify all the critical process parameters and the critical quality attributes. We need to have a good understanding of the raw materials that are previously characterized. We need to know the ranges for that. We need to have equipment. All the requirements need to be known and the conditions under which they operate. And we need to have the understanding of how we're going to scan through the quality management system that is all based on our predefined integrated control strategy that tells us what becomes a deviation, what is not a deviation, when a change control applies to the batch, et cetera. No? And another way of saying this is thinking about now the impact of a change of that ideal of implementing load review and release, for example, in our systems. So in the middle, this is all based, by the way, on the operating model of ISA 95, where you have batch records produced in the middle, and the opportunity to create all the critical process parameter trends from the manufacturing execution. With the top, in the center there, we see the raw material readiness and control that linking to manufacturing execution allows us to capture what raw material we consume, the quantity, and trace back, for example, to the supplier information. And on the right side, we see the alignment with laboratory operations, the creation of the certificates of analysis, the results for in-process samples, and at the top right, the alignment, quality, and compliance processes. And all of this flowing to the bottom right where you see production monitoring. And this is one of the reasons why I like the model so much, because it's not thinking only about the transactions, but also about the use of the data and the interpretation of the data to acquire new knowledge about the process and the product. So we saw two ways then, looking at the complexity, what is really necessary in the previous chart, and now the implications when we make a change and what happens around it in the process. So one of the suggestions that I make about planning for success is having a very sound methodology where we start with the statement of the project, the proposal that we want to bring. We want to get together with the right people, kick off officially these activities, bring the right people to these conversations so where we can understand and have frank discussions about the limitations that we perceive, the outcomes that we want to get out of the process. Go through the second stage when we do the analysis of all the information collected, preparing the outcomes, understanding those challenges, doing the cost analysis, but most of all, understanding the organization readiness to take on projects like this, and understanding before we start what kind of work we need to do to bring the organization to that level, what Yash was describing before. Bring the organization to that point where we can actually contribute, lead in a productive way to the desired outcome. And in the last phase is when we deliver all the results of the analysis, where we define the cost and the support model for the implementation and for the application after go live, the long-term use, and plan a rollout to potentially other areas. And think about organizational change management moving forward, developing a change network, defining the champions that are going to advocate for the technology, for the implementation, and for the long-term use. So in summary now, planning for success requires a mindset. We have sufficient technology to operate our plans and to conduct process development in a really ideal way, better than ever in the history of this industry. So we need to prepare ourselves mentally for this change, embrace it, and hopefully with some of these methodologies that I'm suggesting and others that you have seen in your own practice, we can really achieve that success. In summary, we're proposing innovation projects that are practical, that bring the right benefit, and that they are aligned completely with the digital and with the business strategies. We want to follow sound methodology, so everything that needs to transpire has a place, has room for discussion, so we can plan correctly. We want to assess the complexity. We used that example before of the batch review and release. We want to operate in an organized manner with actual well-prepared portfolios, with budgets, with teams, and under the right governance. And we want to develop that innovation culture that is following leaders that are convinced of the role that these applications will have in the development of new drugs and in the success of the commercialization of all these products. So thank you so much for your attention, and I think that we're going to have an opportunity later for questions in the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gloria.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Gloria. Always so interesting to hear your perspectives as you're working with various organizations in the industry as well. So can we get that? Yeah, so our next speaker is going to be Oliver Hesse. Oliver Hesse is actually going to be speaking to us virtually. He's be patched in from Berkeley, and Oliver is the Vice President and Head of Biotech Data Science and Digitalization at Bayer. In Berkeley, California, he has a degree in biotechnology from the Technical University in Berlin. Started his career in a biotech startup in Germany before joining Bayer in 2008 to work on automation, digitalization, and the application of data science in the biopharmaceutical industry. So welcome, Oliver, and we sorry you can't join us here, but look forward to your talk nonetheless.
I hope you can hear me at least.
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Can you see my slides as well?
Yes.
Fantastic. That works well. Yeah, thanks a lot. And sorry that I can't be there, but certain circumstances. But very grateful that I can speak anyways. And really miss being there because I think, hearing both of your presentations, there would be quite a bit of, food for thought and further discussion than we probably can do in the Q&A afterwards. So my talk today, digitalization and biomanufacturing. Maybe, some themes are actually, very similar to what we heard before, or what you heard before. But maybe there's also a few differences. Let's see if this works here. Go. All right, so let's talk about digitalization. And the first question would actually be, what is digitalization, right? Let's think about a definition. And of course, the first thing, Yash, you mentioned it before, what you do nowadays is you ask ChatGPT, right? What is this? And that's what I did. And also did some little prompt design, which is important for things like GPT and defining what kind of output I want to have and how it should be structured, right? So really, it's quite interesting that my group is called Biotech Data Science and Digitalization, right? Very often I hear the phrase digitization, people call it digitization, and then there's of course digital transformation. What is really the difference, right? And I think it's to some extent important, right? If you look at this here, from a definition, I'm not going to read everything to you, but I think that the major theme is really that if we think about digitalization and digital transformation, it is not just about, using some digital technologies, but really thinking about how can you transform your processes and operations and how can you do things differently, maybe enabled through those new technologies, right? And that could be across a group, a function, an area, or the overall enterprise, right? But really thinking, what can you do different, right? And I think that's the major theme, and not just putting, let's say, formerly analog piece or paper piece in some digital form. Now, if we think about that, I really like this picture, right? Because what we often see is that, companies have, or groups have a certain opinion, what is digitalization? And very often it boils down to, let's be more efficient, let's speed up things, right? And this is kind of, the visual to it. I like visuals, right? But I don't take credit for this one here, honestly. But what, if you really think about it, what it is, and what I just said, is this, right? So we really have to think, different and see that there's a transformation or a transformational approach where we want to do things differently, not just, take the same thing, but try to, speed it up. So that's something I think we should keep in mind. Now, if we think about that, if I was in the audience today, I would ask, for a show of hands, but if you think about different areas, and I picked this one because I think here it's very obvious, right? There was a journey of a digital transformation in this industry, right? And if we think where we are right now in the biopharmaceutical or the pharmaceutical space, I'd be kind of interested, in seeing what your opinion is, right? But if we look at it and take some analogies here, right? Of course, on the very left of the record, that's the very analog thing, paper, right? And this is where, in many parts of the organizations, we still are as an industry as a whole, right? And then, you have some iterations, but if you think about, the nice invention there in the middle, right? You have digitized, you have now CDs, right? But it's still, very siloed, right? You have your one CD, and how did you exchange that with others? Well, you gave them the next CD, right? So, and then you came to something that is where you can actually search for things, right? You can shuffle, but it's still somewhat not, a whole ecosystem around it, right? And only if you get to the point where we are on the very right? Now you are actually enabled, there's standardization to it, there's metadata, there's tags, there's, all kinds of things. And there's a whole ecosystem around it, whether that is now this specific application or others, right? Where really you can now do a lot of things more, right? Where you can analyze a lot of things more, where you get additional benefits out of it, right? So thinking about that, was just one of these examples, I think, or analogies where, we are on the journey. And overall, many people just think about the very right part, right? But, we are actually somewhere in the middle here, if not more to the left side in many parts of the industry. Now, if we want to get to the right, we got to think about PPET. So basically not PowerPoint, but people, process, and technology, right? Because the digitalization, or digitalization in general, is not about technology. And I do some qualification here because later on I may show you some slight qualifier to it, right? But generally, we need to think about people, process, and technology. And, digitalization overall is a holistic exercise, right? As I mentioned, technology alone, and some of my Gloria and Yash mentioned that too, right? Technology alone is not the driver, right? It must align, with people and processes. Processes are very important. We want to do things different, right? And that means also changing processes. And lastly, or not lastly, but very importantly also, people, right? And you mentioned it also before, a really digitally literate workforce or people are really, really essential to drive initiatives. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more, right? Just to give you an idea, so we did in our organization earlier this year a survey because we wanted to get some data, want to get some baseline. Where are we, right, with our data and digital literacy? And it was quite interesting because we saw that many people, and I know it's pretty small, so don't worry too much about the specific questions here, but that we saw that many people are really appreciating data and analytics. They appreciate that that data analytics will help. On the other hand, we saw that if it really goes to more advanced topics like natural language processing or machine learning AI, people struggle, right? So in other words, they're interested, but they don't know too many things about it, right? And this was an outcome more or less that we expected, right? But what we really took away from it is that we really need to educate and upskill people more even because they really don't know what they don't know, right? So they're missing out, and they can't sometimes even describe what they would want, right? Because they don't really understand the technology, right? Or they don't know enough about the technology. And I was along those lines was interesting. Again, not representative sample, but at least some indication that just recently with the show of hands, we asked who has used ChatGPT before, and roughly 1/3 of the people said yes, right? Which I found very interesting because I would have expected it much higher. But anyways, so people, we need to really help them understand some of the technologies, and need to help them understand what digitalization also really means and what it can be, right? Because it is not just enough, and I think if we look at some examples in the past of transformations, it's not enough to just say we do point solutions here. Digitalization is not just about well, we have this one dashboard now where we can see everything, right? Or we install one data scientist and now we're digital, right? And I do the same here, or I do the comparison to the lean principles, right? It's not enough to just have a Kanban board, and it's not enough, to install one master black belt, right? To say we're a lean organization, right? So there's some similarities here as well, right? So really, it's about the philosophy and mindset that you have to really embrace to move forward. And there's actually also, and didn't cite it here, quite some interesting earlier articles from McKinsey around what they call the pilot purgatory, where it's really about you have to embrace the whole concept and not just dip your toe into the water, because then you won't get the full experience of the bath, right? So if you just do little point solutions, it won't give the results that you want to have in the end. Now, if we think about this digital mindset, there's a number of things that you can think of, right? Really about thinking interdisciplinary, right, and across departments. We heard before, adaptability and continuous learning, right? Digital technologies are really moving fast, right? So you need to learn there all the time. You really need to put data in the middle of your decision making, right? And not say, well, I know it that the data says this, but I've got to do that. Automation and AI, generally speaking, is something to embrace, right? And not to just, oh, it doesn't work. Experiment, being agile, right? Really move quickly, fail quickly. Those things are important. And of course, with that comes also some risk taking. But I think that's, things that we have to have in mind when we think about digital. Moving from people to process, I like this, what is written here in the middle, right? If you digitalize a bad process, you still have a bad process. And I think that's very critical, right? So just taking whatever you do and, try to put some digital coating on it or some digital systems around it doesn't make it a better process. It can actually even be worse, right? And on the left here, I show an example of some analysis that we did in some of our processes in the CMC space, right? Don't want to point to some specific area here, but anyways, we looked at that and thought, this is so complicated and so many steps in there that can't be right? We can't just take this and now try to digitalize it. So how can we redesign this and really take advantage of then digital solutions and make it much simpler, more straightforward? And I think that is really, really important, right? And there's this HBR article as well that I cite here. Digital provides possibilities to be more efficient, But, if your processes are not good, it doesn't help you, right? You really need to redesign processes. Now, technology. You see on the left, we, of course, are using a lot of technology, right? We're using a lot of systems. And we define that very carefully, and we think it's the best that we can do, right? And things work together and so on. We did that here, for example, for cell and gene therapy area. But really, technology alone is not the driver, right? We heard it also before. Technology shouldn't be the driver for digitalization, and it's honestly also, from what I see, not the issue, and it's neither the answer, right? There's a number of solutions, and I just have a little snapshot here on the right of all kinds of technology solutions stacks that are out there that are not even specific to biotech, right? But that we can use in one way, shape, or form. And some people may have preference for this or some organization for that, and you want to carefully evaluate what the technology does for your particular need, right? But again, technology in itself is not really the driver. And we heard that before, it's an enabler, right? And I think that's very important. And while we built on the left hand, you see that our stack here and our technology solutions, for another organization, it could look different, and for good reasons, right? So I think that is important to keep in mind. Now, having said that, I'm going to switch a little bit here, because there may be some technologies that have a bigger impact, than other technologies. And Yash, you referenced Gen AI, and I'm going to look into that a little bit more. On the left, we see here a number of headlines, and this is actually a screenshot of a presentation that we did, and a lot of the things that I'm going to show you are from a hackathon that we did in my group earlier this year, where in some kind of an innovation day setting, we looked a lot at generative AI. And the reason for that was, of course, last year, about actually this time, ChatGPT was released. And since then, a lot of things have happened, right? And this is from May. So even then, at that point, a lot of things happened. You see there, again, the headlines, and also some quotes here. And this is from a Goldman Sachs study that suggests that Gen AI could expose the equivalent of 300 million full-time jobs to automation, right? Some others came a little bit later with their assessment. So that one was from March, I think, this year. McKinsey released this report here on the economic potential of Gen AI, right? Which, goes into the same direction, that Gen AI will have significant impact across all industries, right? And specifically also, R&D. It says also, of course, software engineering, but somewhere also very relevant for what we are doing, right? I think they also quote some numbers here, right? And the link is down here. I think it's a very interesting article here from McKinsey as well. Now, generative AI. Everybody knows ChatGPT and maybe Bard, depending on what we're using. And I think actually today Microsoft released Copilot on MS, on your Office suite or on your Microsoft operating system. But that's not all. That's just honestly the peak of the iceberg that we're seeing. And again, this is from this slide here is from kind of May around Mayish, June. And it is quite interesting what is happening kind of behind the scenes. And we say here the real revolution happens in the open source space. You see also, quote from the articles here or from documents like Google, right, where some folks, leaked some documents that basically say we have no moat, right? Neither does OpenAI. And basically, quintessentially, they say open source will be the future. And some of that we see. There's of course newer developments also with the big players moving also quite fast. But what we see is that the whole open source space moves incredibly fast, and we think that we really see exponential growth here, right? And just to give you some ideas, last November, ChatGPT 3.5 was released, right? 175 billion parameters. At the time the gold standard. Right now we're at GPT-4 and something, or GPT-4 large, but in between a lot of the open source things happen, right? So Meta launched what they called Llama, right? Earlier this year, then things like leaked weights happened, so everybody could now use Llama somehow. And then people jumped on that animal theme, like Stanford released alpaca, right? Berkeley released koala later that year. But what happened actually was, you have a lot of those models right now, LLMs, and you could run them on your own computer. You could actually train them yourself, and the training cost dramatically went down, by orders of magnitude, right? On top of that, there's a whole ecosystem that developed around it. Things like agents or chain of thought frameworks that you can build a lot of things around it. Now, why am I saying that? What we started doing is looking at what can it actually help us, right? What is it doing? And while this is maybe now already something a little bit older, but we did in earlier this year this exercise, and this is basically the work of a day of one or two people here. They built this little, what we call it, article summarizer. We use some public available data, specifically here osmolality assay data, right, per USP, and wanted to have an application that summarized what's in there, right? And you see, I hope the video works. Yeah, this very small application where we basically just took this, dragged it into that little application, where we had also some ways to engineer the prompts, right? So we wanted to have bullet points or 4 paragraphs, really go deep or in different languages, and that's the interesting part. Did a very accurate summary the way we wanted to do it, right, with the word count and so on. So we also did that in Greek, in Chinese, and snarky English. So all of that worked quite well. It just gave us, an idea of what can be done. While this particular example may be just somewhat useful, right? We moved that, of course, further into being able to summarize different types of documents and compare them and so on, where you can think about that in very broad terms. And we actually have some programs with Bayer right now that do exactly this. Now, having said that, we did a number of more things that I, in the interest of time, can't show right now. But if you rethink then a little bit, what does it help you to do, right? And this is just, an idea here about what could be possible, right? And, we have this part of what we just showed you. Well, what I didn't show you actually, just in parts, but we looked into, can we get information out of other literature, right? And we used here a Elsevier API to do right that. So we prototyped something like that. We also looked into how can we do experimental design space on looking at literature, right? We can combine that also with some what we call narrow AI, so specific applications that would give you very specific DOE or Bayesian approach to actually define your experiments, right? We could automate the running of experiments, and we didn't prototype that, but there's enough in the industry out there that actually can automate, right? I show some example on top there. And what we also prototyped is that with Gen AI we can actually have an analysis of the data where people just prompt, I want to see something in that direction, or can you tell me about the data? And Gen AI would create the Python code for the visualization and actually then also do some recommendations for next steps, right? So somehow prototype that as well. Does it all work together right now? No, but this opens up, a complete new paradigm in how you do, for example, development. So really thinking very different about, not just having point solutions for, a new process here or a new piece of digitalization here, but really thinking holistically about how can this be done very different if you apply technology. Now, having said that, let me come to an end. Again, trying to stick here with the visual, right? I think it's important, digital transformation is really about thinking different and a transformation, and not just doing the same but speedier. And then if we think and look at Gen AI and also some of the frameworks around it, it can potentially really boost this transformation and what we're able to do there. And with that, thank you very much. We're looking forward to the discussion.
All right. Wow. Lots to think about, right? As you said, there's a lot of activity in the industry, and so we're going to take a few minutes now. Gloria, if you'd like to join me, and Oliver's going to stay on screen, and we can, a little short on time, but answer some questions. So first of all, I'm sure there's a lot going on in everybody's head after all the presentations. Are there questions that, have a seat, Gloria. Questions from the audience around any of these discussions or topics that we heard this morning? I can't see, so. Yeah. So if you didn't hear that, Oliver, the question was, after you did your survey of the people and sort of got that recognition around their literacy, their understanding of technologies, was there anything you implemented to start to address that?
Yes, I couldn't hear the question, but thanks for repeating that. Yes, there were a number of things that we did. We actually put down a pretty comprehensive or larger plan. Let's put it this way. That included different ways of looking at it, from more passive education offerings. So we have put together some called digital journeys, or where you could educate yourself. We have a platform internally that we can use for that, towards seminars on specific topics, towards roundtable discussions. So many different actions that we took. Was a little more tailored. We have some more details around the survey, of course, as well. And we're actually quite ambitious around it. Not all of that materialized due to some resource restrictions, let's put it this way, right? But yes, we put an action plan into place. And the idea is, of course, to repeat that survey to see whether we have any effect, right?
Any other questions?
Yes. Hi, this is Josh Boyle from Bayer. So you were talking about, or all of you were talking about, that we need a cultural mindset change, basically, to arrive at in a company that can be digitalized. So do you think that we have to move away from the current department thinking that we have in companies towards rather something new where the structure is not so heavily focused on this is my department, I'm in upstream, I'm in downstream, I'm in regulatory?
I'll let you go first, and then I certainly have thoughts. But
Yeah, I think here is where the role of leadership is so critical, no? That we need to have leaders that have the mindset, they appreciate, they understand the role of digital technology, and they can advocate for these efforts. You have to make that connection between the functionalities of the digital technology and the solution of those problems that we see every day. That's one aspect of it, and then promote the communication across the organization. No? Establish those discussions between the digital teams in IT, for example, and the business side, so that IT becomes aware of the needs of the business begins to learn about all these opportunities, all this digital technology. Sometimes you need to have a need for a role of, like, let's call them translators, no? These groups that are in between, that are going to help the business understand technology and the challenges and the benefits, and also for IT to understand the realities of the process. So something that...
I mean, I think there's an issue around, so there's this concept of cultural legacy, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about small companies and how they grow up and then they become big companies, right? Small companies start with the mindset that we just have to we have to prove clinically that what we're doing works, right? Now, what happens then is that's just an approach that gets ingrained in the organization, and they keep doing that as they go forward, right? Even when they're big companies, we got to get clinical data. That's where the value comes, right? Except if you think about the modalities that we're in today, right? Gene therapy, cell therapy, right? The mantra is that the process is the product, right? So my question always is, well, how do you know that your process is not actually affecting your clinical results, right? Why isn't that the mindset, right? That, hey, let's make our process really robust. Let's have a really good understanding of our process. So ultimately what we're producing gives us the best chance of meeting the clinical objectives, right? As opposed to thinking about it the other way around. So hopefully the change into this modality, these new modalities will drive that change, which will then hopefully drive sort of this cross-functional collaboration and sort of break down this sort of department thinking that Dan talked about yesterday, that you talked about, that we're all talking about right now. I don't know, Oliver, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I like the question from Joschka, because it's something relevant for Bayer right now, I would say. Because we have a new CEO and he has new ways of looking at things, right? But I would, to a large extent, agree with what Joschka was asking or implying, right? That there needs to be some kind of breakdown and really be much more cross-functional. And I would actually argue that we cannot have, an IT organization sitting somewhere and somebody else, a business organization. I never liked that idea between, there's the business and there's the IT and there's the digital. It really needs to be together, right? It needs to be really closely together and co-located and not even necessarily different functions, right? It is so intertwined, I think that, people need to understand technology, right? And they can't rely on some far away IT or some other function that sits somewhere else, right? So I think that is something that we need to break down much more and have that much closer together. And then now whether it's upstream, downstream, I think those also need to be, much closer together. I think it's a lot about, having really functional groups together and, that have a common goal of an outcome, right? and not so much thinking around, this is my kingdom, this is my line management, and here I do what I would like to do, right? I think that is important.
All right, well, I'm sure there's many other questions. We're running a little bit behind, so we're going to move on to the next sessions, but there'll be plenty of opportunities during the networking breaks to to chat with Gloria or myself or anybody else to continue these discussions. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
And
Yash.
great
you all.
set of presentations. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.